I'm talking with Rob Tillet. He's an astrologer from Australia and an early adopter on the internet with his Astrology on the Web website. And I met Rob just recently on a forum on Facebook, and he and I were we were allies of sorts in a very long debate about the ethics of astrology, and it felt like Rob and I were on the same page on a lot of things. So I wanted to have him on the show, and I just want to say hi and welcome to Navigating the Astrological Matrix, Rob.
Well, thank you, Robert. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Great. Good to have you here. And one of the things that I generally ask people when we bring them on the show, or I bring them on the show, is the one thing that unites us is that we're astrologers, and we love astrology, and at some point in time, we get turned on to it. And, that's different for every person. So I'd love to find out, when sort of the light went off in your head and said, hey, astrology, this is kind of cool. Maybe I should get into this more.
Okay, well, when I was about 21, which is in prehistory, I had a very serious motorcycle accident. And I was wrapped up in plaster for about 6 months. And prior to that, I'd been quite skeptical about astrology. And I decided to look into it to see what it was all about. And then I found that it started to make sense. So I began to look at my own chart and the chart of people I knew. And from then on, I became pretty involved to the extent where eventually I started the Astrology on the Web website, and since then I've been doing nothing but astrology.
So
I did have a few periods of actual professional astrology prior to that, but nothing. Well, that was before astrology was available on the personal computer, and it just took so much time that I figured I couldn't really charge people the amount of time that it took.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, so generally, when people get into astrology and they start to see these connections and these patterns that just show up consistently time and time again, after a while, the whole random coincidence factor just goes right out the window. And when you started to experience these kind of aha moments in astrology, what was that like for you?
Well, it was difficult because prior to that, I had been quite anti-astrology, and so I had to revise my entire way of thinking, which I did. And now, as you say, I don't see this ever a coincidence, and in fact, the clarity that astrology gives to the experience of daily life, both on the personal and the societal level, and indeed on the spiritual level, is so intense that you can't go back to saying, well, it all just happens because it happens.
And it's very hard to convey this to somebody who is a disbeliever or a skeptic, or just wants to put it down outright. I mean, it's one of these things that's really kind of living and organic, and you really have to kind of experience it on your own. And obviously you had a life shock, which sort of opened you up to be able to do this. What is your in all the years that you've been practicing astrology? What would be your best? And we have time to do this. You don't have to answer it in the one or two sentences. But what would be your best summarization as to what is the power behind astrology? What are we talking about to bring these aspects and these angles together in ways that make absolute perfect sense for people in their lives?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure if you're asking me how does astrology work. Is that right?
Sort of. I'm actually trying to get at this from sort of more of I'm not really looking for a technical or I don't want to, I mean, we can flesh out the technical stuff, but there's something behind the levers and the pulleys of this that is driving the.
Well, I think, okay,
yeah, yeah.
I think I'd have to go back to the ancient Greeks, who believed in a world soul, as well as various other things that perhaps we don't believe in now. But the world soul, or the being, the anima mundi, as it's called in Latin, is like the consciousness that wraps the entire earth, and including the human beings, the animals, the plants, the stones, the air. And it's interconnected, it's deeply interconnected. And things that we experience as events, or tragedies, or relationships, or happiness, it's really a kind of unfolding of a very integrated pattern. And this very integrated pattern, you have some control over, but by and large, it's more like surfing. There's a big wave, and we can surf it or we can be swamped by it. And it's like surfing in that you have the opportunity to change the direction of your surfboard, but you don't have the opportunity to change the direction of the wave. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, and for me, I mean, that ties into sort of the some of the concepts around the noosphere and Teilhard de Chardin, and some of the things that I sort of ascribe to in terms of the sort of the back end, or the consciousness that pervades sort of the soul of the world as well. How do you deal with the fatalistic aspect of astrology? Like, for instance, I have a friend right now who's going through a major Saturn opposition, in their chart, and for them, it's like, they see that as a grind. They know they have enough working knowledge of astrology to understand that that's a negative aspect in some degrees. But how, in terms of riding that wave, and you've got a challenging aspect like that, how do you as an astrologer deal with it, and how do you as a human deal with that in your own life?
Well, as an astrologer, if you were consulting me, I would say that every experience that comes to your life is designed to bring into greater consciousness. This is karma, in the sense that you could have perhaps, had you been good enough, 100 years before, have looked at this person's chart and said, this type of experience is likely to happen at the age of whatever it is. It's a Saturn opposition, so maybe it could be any age, but it's not likely to be a Saturn return.
Right.
And as a person, I find it fairly difficult to deal with these things, because I still have a strong belief in our ability to achieve things. And one of the ways of achieving things is by restructuring your reality. Now, my reality has been restructured to a large extent by a study of astrology, so I now no longer believe that we can change everything. But what we can change is our own outlook on things. Now, it's a bit like pleasure and pain. Some feelings are interpreted by the human being as pain, most people. Other people may interpret that pain not as a pain at all, maybe even as a pleasure. So a person who is a long-distance runner may experience what perhaps you and I, who may not be long-distance runners, might think is a fairly painful experience. But the level of joy and pleasure that such people can gain out of these difficult experiences is like taking pain to another level and turning it into a joy.
Right.
And in some ways, I think we can do that with nearly all of the things that happen to us. Now, if we happen to be in Joplin and our house is wiped out and our family is wiped out and we've got broken legs, it's very hard to take a positive view. But maybe as time goes by, something really good comes out of this. I think perhaps let's imagine that we're a busload of athletes heading for the Olympic Games, and the bus falls off a cliff. This is karma. The bus fell off the cliff. All of you lined up at that time to have a bus fall off a cliff in your life. Now, One athlete loses his legs and says, I can't live like this anymore, my life is finished. He commits suicide. Another athlete loses his legs. He falls in love with the nurse who looks after him and nurses him back to the hospital. He marries her. He goes on to become a champion in the disabled Olympics. This is the person using the same kind of external event in a completely different way. One person allowed himself to be crushed by the wave or swamped by the wave. Another person was able to turn his surfboard in a slightly different direction. It's the same thing. He's still an athlete. He's a different kind of athlete. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that answering my question? Or is that
I think it actually expands the question a little bit more, and that, I think it's a terrific answer. I wanted to follow that up with: do you find that there are certain signs with ascendants, or certain ascendants where people actually embrace conflict or embrace pain as kind of a way to transform their lives, or at least a touch into who they are in a significant way?
No, I've never really looked at that. I don't think I'd put that down to the ascendant, because you've got to look at you can't judge somebody by their ascendant. You have to look at the whole chart.
Right.
It's not possible to judge. But that's like sun sign astrology doing the whole thing. I mean, my sun sign is Cancer, but it doesn't mean that I fit every kind of nuance of the Cancerian character, nor would I want to. But my rising sign is Sagittarius. It's much more outgoing, much more, shall we say, looking on the other side of the hill. So I don't know how you would judge it. I wouldn't judge it by a sign. I would judge it by the total pattern of the chart.
The character of the chart. The reason I bring that up is because I know of two individuals who are both Aries, and and I've seen them both, dive sort of headfirst into that kind of what some people would call conflict, or learning through pain, or learning through challenge. And other personality types. Myself, I've got a stellium of planets in Libra. It's like I'm not necessarily conflict avoidant, but if I can find a softer way to get to someplace, I certainly would. Okay. But I've seen this in the Aries type, where it is, and again, I don't want to be superficial and just say all Aries are like this, but I've noticed that if there is a sign that certainly reflects this kind of dealing with conflict in a way that other people don't. I've certainly seen it in a number of Aries people that I know.
Well, Aries is certainly an aggressive sign, and a very good friend of mine, Neil Giles, who is writing Astrology. As strangely enough, our lives have been really parallel existences. Now he's an Aries, and this guy, nothing would stop him. But on the other hand, he had a very large swag of planets in his 12th house. So he's a psychic. He's also found himself constantly dealing with people from what might be described as the wrong side of the tracks, criminals, drug addicts, and so on. I don't know that you can say that Aries will charge at everything.
Right.
Problems, solutions, whatever, and they love the challenge. You can't win an Aries by boring them. You can't win anybody by boring them. But an Aries person is extremely dynamic, usually, and creative.
Yeah.
The Libran person is also a cardinal sign. So Libra is creative, not so dynamic, more harmonious, ruled by Venus, as opposed to being ruled by Mars. That's what those type of things mean. Mars, as a symbol, is action, violence, jumping over the fence. Venus is inviting people in, creating a nice environment, having beautiful music, not racing forward and trying to push the ball out of the paddock.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You get that?
Oh, absolutely. You touched on the 12th house a little bit in terms of your friend. I think the 12th house is fascinating. And one of the most misunderstood houses in the zodiac. I'd love to get your take on the 12th house and what you have experienced with your clients, and maybe with your own sort of 12th house transits that you might have gone through.
Well, at the moment, I've got my progressed moon going through the 12th house. Mm-hmm. It's not good. And even though, fortunately for me, it's forming good aspects with my chart. What happens with the 12th house? And I was reading some ancient astrologers on the very topic of the 12th house only a couple of days ago, as a matter of fact. I won't talk about them. You asked me what I thought. The 12th house is very much to do with anything that's hidden, concealed, or unable to be accessed in the usual kind of way. It's connected also with any form of imprisonment or being held down or held back, secrets, issues that you may not like coming to light. It's traditionally the house of secret enemies. It is also the house of prisons, of big institutions, anywhere where you feel as though you're confined, like a hospital, a mental asylum. Even a big company can be very confining. Mm-hmm. People often confine themselves in their little cubicles,
right,
and they work in these huge departments and so on. It's very Kafkaesque, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, a person who's heavily orientated to 12th house in their chart is someone who will invariably, as far as I can see, have to deal with matters which are often kept in the dark and are often quite frightening. They will also have the opportunity to use these experiences for a powerful spiritual growth. Mm-hmm. Because when you experience matters which perhaps could be viewed as unpleasant or terrifying or restrictive, you have to deal with this business of the surfboard having to change course. And it may be that you will learn to refocus your life through the experiences of the 12th house. Now bear in mind that with astrology, nothing is fixed. You don't stay in the 12th house unless you die. Because let's say your sun is in the 12th house when you're born. The sun, by progression, every year, moves a degree. Mm-hmm. So if your 12th house is, we're talking about Aries, let's say your 12th house, your sun was at 15 degrees of Aries and your rising sun is 1 degree of Taurus. By the time you're 16, you won't be in Aries anymore. You'll still have the basic flavour of Aries, but for the following 30 years, your emphasis is on Taurus. So we have the idea of the progressions are like, those kind of drinks where the colours go up the glass,
right.
The alcoholic drinks, tall glasses, different layers of colour going up the glass.
Yeah.
It seems to me the natal chart, and we're dealing with the 12th house here, the natal chart itself is like the drink in the glass. But there's different flavours of the drink going up the glass in the different colours. But the natal chart is the basic drink. And the progressions, and to some extent the transits, are that as you go up the glass, you move into these different colours. It's a bit like, to keep in the drink metaphor, coffee is coffee, but when you add milk, and then add sugar, and then maybe add Tia Maria, you have a drink which doesn't taste anything like the original coffee.
Right.
And it can be that way with a person. As these significant changes come to their life, they're still the same person, they're still coffee, but they know they've got sugar in the coffee, so their approach to other people is quite different. And this, I think, comes through progressions and major transits.
That's a great analogy. Do you?
An answer?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Do you see the 12th house as having also a point of transcendence, meaning that you are ensconced in the limitations of the 12th house, but at some point it turns on a pivot and it opens you up to greater understanding, greater depth, greater compassion, greater wisdom, greater immersion in consciousness. Have you found this to be also evident in the 12th house?
I think what you've just said, I think, is a strong possibility with the 12th house. But as I said before, you can't judge just by the 12th house.
Yeah.
I mean, some people will be put into prison and die.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very 12th house experience.
Yeah.
Not going to get them out. But if a person is actively working on improving their spiritual level or their growth in consciousness, or even just trying to get more control over their life, as opposed to simply going with the flow, I think your opportunities for this in the 12th house might be indicated by... I can't really answer that question because I'd have to look at a person's chart to make a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But the theory of the 12th house is that it is a house of great restriction. It's a house of being held back, and it has got... I just slightly illustrate what I'm talking about. I look at the life. It's like a long continuum. It's like a string, and the string has got a main current. This causes you, and causes nearly everybody, to flow in a certain direction in the same way as the wave that we were talking about before does. But every so often you come to a sort of a weir or a tributary in the river. And that is the opportunity where you can get out of the mainstream. Instead of floating along like a bug on a leaf, you can fly off into the secondary tributary. That's still a stream, it's still going in a certain direction, but my view of that is that you are raising your level of consciousness to a higher level, higher stage of growth. And the stage of growth, I think in the 12th house, one of these little nexuses of probability, if you like, that the 12th house really stimulates you to want to do something about it. Unless you wish to be imprisoned and overwhelmed and bricked up in a tower, you want to do something about it. And so I would think that strong transits in particular, but also progressions to planets from the 12th house or in the 12th house, are going to bring you to what I call a nexus of probability. And this nexus of probability is like shaking you awake.
Mm-hmm.
And your little eyes might open up a bit, and you see in this dark place, the 12th house, you might see a tunnel with light at the end of it, and you can then make the decision to go down that tunnel. I don't want to sound fatalistic here. I have a friend who contributed a lot to our website named Ram Ramakrishnan. He's an Indian astrologer. And he said about fatalism, he said, since I became a fatalist, everything has been perfect. But because it doesn't matter what happens, it's intended to happen. But I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about fate. I'm saying that we have the opportunity to turn fate into destiny. And the difference between fate and destiny is that fate is what happens to you, and destiny is what you're able to make happen.
Right. Yeah.
With the tools that you give. You can't change the tools that you give. If you're born with no arms, you have no arms. However, it may be that you can, if you really want to get some arms, you can find someone who can make you a nice pair of artificial arms.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So my computer just went to sleep. I did tell it not to turn on. Go on anyway.
So, staying with the 12th house a little bit, I'm just going back in time and remembering, because you
love the 12th house.
What's that?
You love the 12th house.
Well, I'm intrigued by it right now because it's I don't know, it's just coming up for me. So, you're a Sag rising. I'm a Scorpio rising, but barely 28 degrees. Most of my first house is Sag, obviously. And in the 90s, for me, it was the 90s when I had Pluto moving through my 12th house, and I'm sure it was right around the same time, maybe a little bit earlier, late 80s, early 90s. You were having that Pluto transit as well through your 12th house. For me, that was an incredibly powerful time, and it really it brought my shadow, some really dark stuff inside of me, right to the surface for a good 4 to 5 year period. It was very powerful, very intense. It was one of the more challenging periods of my life. I got into legal trouble. I was battling with addictions, and this was a true 12th house experience. What was your experience like with Pluto moving through the 12th?
We have no money. We have no money. We don't have anything.
Robert,
I pay.
my wife, who I warned you was insane, has just come in.
Yeah, I pay. I pay for everything to it.
That was interesting. What house did that come up in? Are you there? Wow. I think our interview came to a crashing halt. Wow. All right. We'll have to see where that goes. Okay. Okay, we had a brief glitch in the matrix there, and got Rob back on, and we were just discussing off the air the 12th house a little bit. He wanted to go a little bit deeper and get into kind of a Greek aspect or definition around the 12th house and relationship and the intensity. And Rob, why don't you pick that up and continue with that line of thought? That was interesting.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the 12th house. We were also talking about the way you can grow through the tensions that are attached to the 12th house by becoming aware. Now, the 12th house is traditionally known as the Kakadaimon, which means the evil demon. Sometimes that's applied also to the moon's south node, or the dragon's tail.
Right.
But what happens is that as you form a relationship with anybody or anything, you form an energetic connection using the natural non-material connections of what we would describe as the subtle body or the chakra system. So you form an intense relationship with somebody. Most people think this is my soulmate. And so that's an intense relationship. But what really is a soulmate? A soulmate is someone who is there to fulfill you as a person. Sometimes the fulfillment as a person is not always pleasant. In fact, by no means pleasant. When I'm talking about the Kakadaimon, this is the evil demon. Sometimes we feel as though the other person is the evil demon. Now, what the Greeks also thought about the evil demon was that it was all the parts of you that you had put to one side and didn't want to deal with. These became the Kakadaimon, or the evil demon. It's something that you need to relate to in order that you can see what you've put away and whether you're finished with it or whether you haven't. And I think this idea of what I call the dyadic relationship, where two people form extremely intense energetic connections, is related in some ways to that. It doesn't mean that always the person that you are dealing with is evil or anything of that nature at all, but it does mean that they are there to bring out all the things in you that you might not know about. When we talk about the soulmate, we talk about the other half, the person who fulfills the bits that are missing from you. Sometimes that person is what you dump the other bits onto, and they dump their bits onto you. And this is a way where personal growth achieves galactic speed. What do you think of that?
That's not bad. That's I think if you can, again, using your metaphor of the wave, if you can ride that giant wave, absolutely.
That's right.
The challenge is a lot of times in those heated, intense, powerful connections like that, you get knocked off your board, you get knocked under the wave, and sometimes you bang your head on a piece of coral underneath, and you come back up. I mean, it's
Exactly.
yeah. So we are staring down the second solar eclipse of this year. First one, of course, being on January 4th. The next one being on July 1st. June 1st, solar eclipse. Of course, new moon. Gemini partially visible through the northern hemisphere, mostly China, Siberia, parts of Russia. So, what is Canada? What is your take on this particular eclipse, and how do you see the cycles of the eclipses playing out on a collective level this year?
I don't know about the collective level, but they're certainly having a turbo effect on me. This current eclipse, which is happening very shortly, is a minor eclipse. It is, and why is it a minor eclipse? There's two reasons. One, eclipses, I think you'll find, if you study them, have a greater effect the more people are actually under them. That might sound a bit odd because here we are, we're under an eclipse, everybody's under an eclipse, but you can really be under an eclipse.
Yeah.
Meaning that you can see the eclipse, the sun goes away, the world darkens, etc., etc. However, very few people in the world are going to suffer from that this time around because it's so far north. Now, we're going to get...
Are you there? I've lost you. This is the Eclipse of Silence with Rob Tillet. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we just had a partial eclipse of this interview.
An eclipse of my computer, I think.
Yeah, so now the sun has passed and we can continue on our merry way.
Oh, okay. Well, the eclipse, can you hear me now?
Yeah, clearly.
Good. The eclipses, there are three eclipses in this cycle. One is today, or tomorrow, your time, and then we have a lunar eclipse on the 15th. This is a total eclipse. That will be very visible to a large number of people. And then we have another partial eclipse, which only the penguins from the South Pole are going to see. That's on July 1st.
Right.
Now, it's significant that there are three eclipses in the sense that it's a strengthening of the cosmic pressure, if you like.
Right.
However, the two solar eclipses, which normally have massive effects on the world, are not so strong because hardly anybody's going to see them. When we look back to the eclipse of 1999, that was the most viewed eclipse in human history. Millions of people saw that eclipse.
Yeah.
If you can remember 1999, which was a long time ago,
Yeah.
there were huge earthquakes, there were massive fires, there were all kinds of terrible tragedies, and they followed exactly along the path of the eclipse.
And the eclipse was most visible in Iran at that point in time, wasn't it?
It was Turkey, actually.
Turkey. Okay.
And there was an earthquake there which displaced 200,000 people, killed thousands of people. Anyway, that is an example of the pathway of the eclipse being very, very, very visible and having a massive effect. It had other massive effects too, but I don't want to go into that right now. Now, this eclipse that we're dealing with, the eclipse in Gemini, it has less effect of the eclipse itself, but it's a south node eclipse. Now, the south node is the Quatre Diamants. We were talking about that before, remember?
Right.
And the south node itself is heavily aspected in a problematic way. Now, I've got all the facts in front of me here, because I wasn't really sure that we were going to talk about all this, and I'm writing an article on the eclipse now, which, because of the terrible effect that these things are having on me, I haven't finished, even though the eclipse is almost upon us. But I am writing it, and I usually like to look at the fixed stars as well.
Right.
The fixed stars, not many people deal with them. People think, astrology is all about the stars, but really astrology is about patterns. It's not about the stars. If the stars are indirectly affected, because the constellation, say, of Scorpio, which you were talking about before, or Libra, is not the same as the sign Libra, and never has been.
Right.
Even though at one stage the constellations and the signs coincided, which is why they have the same name. They don't, of course, now, because of the phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes,
Right.
whereby the equinoxes move backwards through the zodiac. These give us these ages that we talk about, the astrological ages, where the tropical zodiac, or the movable zodiac, moves backwards against the sidereal zodiac, or the zodiacal constellations. Now, we're at the end of the astrological sign of Pisces. As we speak, the astrological sign of Pisces is really nearly over after 2,000 years of it, about to go into the famous age of Aquarists. But I don't think very many people in our lifetime are going to be experiencing the age of Aquarius precisely. Oh no, she's back in here. No, she's gone again. She must be going to better mood. You can clip that. Anyway, this. Oh no, I've just lost my.
We were talking about people. There aren't many people that are going to experience the age of Aquarius.
There's not many people going to experience this eclipse directly, but it's still going to affect people in the north of Japan, people in Korea, people in the north of China, the north of Russia. It's going to go over there, and you'll see some effects. And whether or not it's going to make it's going to have an effect on the nuclear problem in Japan. It's an earthquake-prone area. My experience of eclipses is that they are often, especially the total eclipses, they are powerfully connected with earthquakes. And I've written quite a bit about that, which is on our website, but I won't worry about chasing it up for the moment. This, I think it's like a new moon in Gemini, and it's going to be a little bit more intense. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was a...
Well, here we go. We've entered into the cone of silence. One more time with Rob Tillet. I think these gaps in speech is when he tunes out and probably attunes to some higher vibration of consciousness, which is downloading the next train of thought that he's about to deliver. And I get a sense that Rob is going to come back in to his body here in about a minute or so, maybe less than a minute, 40 seconds, and continue on with the story of the eclipses. Until then, you're listening to Navigating the Astrological Matrix. And this might be the most curious interview I've ever done. This is with Rob Tillet from Australia. And I think he's back.
Oh, am I back?
You're back now.
You can hear me?
I can. What I've shared with the listeners is I figured this out.
I could hear you. I heard it all.
You heard it all. Okay, yeah. There you go. You're back, and you've downloaded the next wave of knowledge.
Yeah, I guess so.
So here we go.
Where were we?
You're talking about the Fukushima and the earthquakes.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't know whether you got this, but what I said was I don't think this eclipse in itself is really much more karmically significant than an intense new moon in Gemini.
Right.
Because not enough people are going to be affected by the eclipse directly. It's not actually going to block the light. So I think, however, that the fact that there are 3 eclipses in a row, and that we are in this incredibly life-changing time, that they will have more power than a single new moon. Now, why are we in an incredibly life-changing time? It's because the planets Jupiter and Uranus moved into Aries, which is the vernal point, the beginning of the tropical zodiac. That in itself is extremely powerful. However, we had, a few months back, we had a grand cross in the cardinal signs.
Right.
Because we had Saturn opposing Jupiter from Libra.
Right.
Now, you've been experiencing Saturn going through Libra for the last year or so. So you must have felt fairly strongly pressured.
Yeah, I've had Saturn on my moon for Moon Mercury for most of the last year.
That's horrible.
Sorry, yeah.
We also had, going across the other way, we have Pluto in Capricorn.
Right.
And we have the moon's nodes moving out of Capricorn into Sagittarius, because the moon's nodes always move backwards through the zodiac.
That's right, yeah.
I had the south node moving across my sun only too recently, and it's now moved into Gemini.
Right.
Gemini is under pressure at the moment because the south node's in it, and because these eclipses are there as well, although, of course, the one on the 1st of July is not. But anyway, the point is this. The other thing that happened, which is really a great rarity, is that owing to this function of the precession of the equinoxes that we spoke about a few minutes back, the fixed star sheet, which is a very nasty little piece of work, also moved across the first degree of tropical areas.
Right.
It doesn't move in the sidereal zodiac, so to speak. But what it is, when we say that the star moved onto the first degree of Aries, really what happened was the first degree of Aries moved onto the star. But that's a minor point. From the point of view of everybody who looks casually at it, sheet has now moved into Aries. Now this produced a massive change. And with the moon's nodes changing sign, Jupiter and Uranus changing sign, Saturn opposing, and Pluto squaring, we had the Arab Spring.
Right.
We had the earthquakes in Japan. And last year, we had a whole bunch of other stuff. We had the earthquakes in Haiti and other massive disasters.
We had
tornadoes
yeah.
of the most phenomenal sort in America.
Right.
Huge things are happening in the world at the moment, and they can be connected in many ways to the movement of Pluto, the movement of the fixed stars, and the movement of the outer planets and the nodes. So you've got, traditionally speaking, Saturn and Jupiter were the big movers of the generations, of the big switches, of the big changes. So when you have a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, it happens every 20 years or so, it's a massive thing. When you have an opposition, which we've just had, it's just as massive, only it's much more unpleasant. And we just had the opposition a few months back for Jupiter and Saturn. And lucky for you, they were in Libra, or Saturn's in Libra while this is going on. The terrible things that are going on in the world at the moment can be tracked really quite readily by the astrological points, especially if they happen to coincide by aspect with issues that are in your own chart, I mean planets.
Right.
Points like the moon's nodes and the part of fortune, the angles of the chart, the angles being the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house. They are the most powerful parts of the person's horoscope chart, and any planets that are there, or any transits that are happening there, or progressions, are massively much stronger than they would be if they were happening somewhere else. So we've got this, this big thing that everybody's going through at the moment. Everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you live in the United States. I can't imagine that the people in the United States, say, 4 years ago, could possibly have imagined the horrors that have been going on in the United States for the last few years. Now, some people say, well, that's just karma because of everything that America, the great, the bold, and the beautiful has been doing in other parts of the world, such as Iraq and Afghanistan. But I don't necessarily hold that. I think the whole world itself is going through massive things, and the people are being pushed by a wave. And the question is whether you're going to surf the wave or whether you're going to be swamped by the wave.
Right.
Now, if your house has lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in value, well, that's part of being swamped by the wave. So the main thing is to get out of the loan, whichever way you can, and bank in your style.
Right.
You see what This is whether you get thrown off your surfboard and have your head broken on a rock,
right,
or whether you're able to come back to the surface.
Yeah, surfing is a great analogy for what we're talking about.
I think it is. Surfing and coffee.
Surfing and coffee. I like that. Hey, so let's get back to this sheet. You had some negative things to say about sheet. Why is that?
Well, there's nothing good to say about sheet. Sheet, S-C-H-E-A-T, sheet,
Right.
is an unpleasant little star. There are a number of stars, most of which have got nasty habits to go with them, some of which are great. Like, for example, Spica is a beautiful star that does everybody lots of good. Sheet, on the other hand, like Faces, which is even nastier, and Caput Algol, which is the worst star of all, they have rather peculiar effects when activated. Like, they're always there, the stars are always there, but when something happens and it's directly connected to a major star like Sheet, you have these really quite extraordinary things that come about on planet Earth, and can be tracked by this. And whether or not you can't predict a specific thing from a fixed star, but you can predict a tone, like the tone of the world. And the tone of the world, with the ground crossing cardinal signs that we've just been going through, and the movement of Sheet over the Aries point, or the vernal point as it's called, these have to produce difficulties. When we're connected with I was talking before about the planet Pluto, which is a very slow-moving planet. It's almost a fixed star. It's a slowly moving fixed star. And when that moves into your chart and that has effects, they affect the world. It's like in December of 2007, just as a prelude to the big crash of 2008, we had Jupiter moving into Capricorn and Pluto moving into Capricorn, and Saturn a few months beforehand had moved into Virgo. Only days after Saturn moved into Virgo was the beginning of the terrible tribulations that we've had over the last few years, because that's when Northern Rock, the big British bank, started to go under. Mm. And then it went on, and we had Lehman Brothers in 2008 and so on, so everybody knows what happened there. They all know that the US dollar has fallen to half.
Right.
That the real estate boom has busted. That the car manufacturers, General Motors, who would have imagined that General Motors could go cap in hand to the government asking for billions of dollars, let alone Chrysler. Ford managed to get through it. But these kind of things, they don't happen by accident, and they don't happen by coincidence. They happen because the planet, if you like, is getting up and shaking off its fleas.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, I started to really track this stuff on a collective level. I mean, I always tracked it on a collective level, but as part of the public record. It was in 1998 when I started to shift my website to astrology, and I began to track the presidential primaries and the election, and then I began to get into Pluto and Capricorn before Pluto was moving into Capricorn, and for me, Pluto and Capricorn cast a giant shadow across not only what I was doing, but what everybody was doing and was going to do, and I felt, for me, it felt like very much like the rise of Sauron in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's true.
And and here we are now. We're We're 3 years into Pluto and Capricorn, and we've seen the convergence of governments and corporations, which in the terms of in the language of Benito Mussolini is the definition of fascism.
That's correct.
And what we're seeing and have been seeing is the rise of the definition of fascism, or the rise of the corporatocracy of Pluto and Capricorn. And yet we have Saturn in Libra, which is squaring off against Pluto, and really trying to give some form of balance, some form of accounting to this sort of titanic force that is encroaching on the rest of us. And I see the whole Saturn and Libra, Capricorn, Pluto axis as being more worked out in our own personal lives than really on the collective level. I mean, if Saturn and Libra were really, kicking into gear, and maybe it will, because we're still, in the second retrograde, I believe, of Saturn, and it's at 10 degrees now or 11 degrees now. 10 degrees. And maybe by the time Saturn moves forward and we get closer or deeper into Saturn and Libra in 2012, we might see the manifestation of some real outward forms of peace and people really wanting to bring fairness and equality and liberty to the collective. But I feel like right now a lot of that's happening kind of underneath everything. Like we're trying to find equilibrium and balance in our own lives, our own relationships, our own connection to things that have value for us. And I feel like we're not quite at the point of the iceberg, where we're breaking the water with Saturn and Libra. I see that more in 2012, but I still feel like that it's having a powerful effect in some ways in offsetting this titanic Pluto and Capricorn energy.
Well, I think the movement of Pluto into Capricorn, and which is associated almost to the day with the movement of Jupiter into Capricorn, produced a massive urge for change in the collective. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, yeah, we're there.
Yep.
Now, the Australian government was changed, the US government was changed, the British government was changed, a whole lot of others were changed. That's fine. That's all moving forward. Saturn then, fortunately for us, last year, got out of Virgo and is into Libra. Saturn is what they say exalted in Libra.
Right.
In other words, it's in its best place.
Yeah.
That means the urge for justice is strong. This is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And, okay, the personal side of it, where an individual is affected, will depend on how it falls in his own chart or her chart. The prime urge of Saturn in Libra is for justice. Now, people in the Middle East are all screaming for justice now. They're out there shooting each other in the streets trying to get it. People in America, people in Australia, people in Europe, they all require justice. Oh, my computer is about to die again. I'm not sure why. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. It isn't going to die. It's set over to... I don't know what it's doing. Hello?
I'm right here.
Oh, good. I don't know why it's doing this. It's just one of those days. It's the eclipse, I think.
It's got to be let's blame it on the eclipse.
Everything's changing colours, and Gemini, of course, is about communication.
Yeah.
So when we have a solar eclipse, it means that the emotional life is climbing over the top of the spiritual life, or the material life and the habits of the past. That's the meaning. We're climbing over the spirit, which is the sun. So we have to allow the past to go away and make a new beginning. That's the meaning of a new moon, but it's also the meaning of a solar eclipse.
Mm.
So the past might be my computer system. Maybe I should get a new computer system.
Why not? I mean, you're worth it.
I've had this one since 2004. So it's just about at the end of this year.
Yeah, you're ready for an upgrade, Rob.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Unfortunately, my computer program won't run on the latest systems, which is why I'm stuck with this.
So maybe you see a computer that you can talk to the rest of the world from.
Yeah, well, maybe I do. Anyway, look, what we're talking here about Saturn in Libra.
Yep.
Saturn is great in some ways, but it does pull you up against what it is that you have to do. Not what doesn't try to crush anything, doesn't crush you. Saturn's noted for crushing things, but when it's in Libra, it pulls you up and tries to make you recognise what it is that you have to do. What is the need, not what is the want. It doesn't matter what you want to do. Saturn in Libra will bring you to what you need to do. This is the thing. Now, the problem's being, we've got all this massive energy in Aries, or we have done, because Jupiter is now just about to move into Taurus, which is going to bring a huge change to everybody.
Yes.
is that will release a lot of this stress of Jupiter opposing Saturn and the other planets, of course. Now, if you have to come up to the plate. That's what Saturn in Libra is asking you to do. You've got to come up to the plate, and you have to decide on what it is that you need to do, and then do it. And the obstructions that will come through the Pluto square and the oppositions that we've been dealing with for the last year and a half or more, they won't be there. They're not so strong because it's moving away from that.
Right.
They're all moving away. We still have to deal with the eclipses. We still have to deal with the fixed stars. They're not moving anywhere. But for now, because the eclipse that we're dealing with is in Gemini, there's a breakdown in communication we've just been experiencing there. And it's going to come to the extent where we need to make a new connection. And the new connection will be with what it is in terms of our lives, where Gemini is in the chart. Now, in the case of a Gemini person, is right there smack dab on their sun. So it's very much to do with the soul being of the Gemini character, which has been, the emotions will be sweeping over Gemini very heavily this month, because in 2 weeks' time we've got the full moon in Sagittarius,
Right.
where of course the sun is still in Gemini, but it's eclipsed.
Yeah.
The moon is eclipsed. When the lunar eclipse happens, that is terribly emotional for most people. It's a full moon anyway, and everybody knows that we go out and howl at the full moon. But when it's eclipsed, then we have the, instead of the emotions simply going over the top of the soul, we have the emotions and the habits and the personality pulling against the soul, because the sun is the soul, the moon is the outer side.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is what a lunar eclipse is. And the lunar eclipse is a total lunar eclipse, and it's far more likely to have pretty powerful effects, but both on you and me, because of Sagittarius being in the first house.
Yeah, I have.
Looking forward to that, I think.
I have Jupiter and Sag in my first house as well. So.
Yeah. Well, Jupiter in Sagittarius is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not bad. It's cool. I dig it. I eat a little too much and drink a little too much, but other than that, I like it. So you've been doing this on the internet since 1998, and you were obviously a very early adopter with astrology on the internet, and you've seen a lot of changes take place with not only astrology on the internet, but computer software with astrology. Can you talk about what it was like to get out there early and do what you were doing, and some of the things that have changed over the past few years with astrology on the internet?
Okay. When we started, there wasn't very much of anything on the internet, or the World Wide Web, as we should say. We thought, or put it like this: why did we start it in the first place? Well, we needed something to do, that's one thing. But a friend of mine who had just become divorced and who ran a computer store, he said to me, you know what's going to happen is that everybody, at this stage, matchmaking on the internet is in its very infancy. He said everybody is going to need to find a partner, and the way they're going to do it is on the internet. This is quite prophetic. He, of course, was keen to find a partner. He said, you know all about astrology, and this other friend of his, whose name is Ian Fernwald, who's now no longer with Astrology on the web, he's decided that he's better off as a librarian, and good luck to him. And he said, the two of you could do something with this. You could set up a matchmaking system using astrology, because doesn't astrology tell you how people can get on and where their good points are and how they match together? And we said, yeah, okay, so we could do this. So this is in 1997, we decided to build the website for that. We started doing it, and Ian in particular was very concerned about other parts of astrology, not just matchmaking astrology. He said, well, we should do a broad thing, and we should organise it so that people can learn about astrology as well. So we did that. We opened up the thing online in March the 11th of 1998, and immediately, within a very short time, it became quite a popular website. And it got so busy doing ordinary horoscopes and things for people that we never did set up the matchmaking website, even though in a number of times over the years I have contacted people like RSVP and the other matchmaking websites to do something about it. Now, as it's turned out, both of us, for one reason or another, have just flipped in other directions and haven't done it.
Right.
But you asked me about software. Well, we specifically decided early on, and I now think this is a mistake, but we specifically decided that we wouldn't do computer-generated stuff because we felt that the essential thing about astrology was the personal interaction between the astrologer and the client. As it turns out, after 13 or 14 years or whatever it is on the internet, I now know that everybody wants stuff quick and cheap and fast and preferably free. So the actual thing of not doing things by computer is now fallen by the wayside. But the computer software which is being produced and run by companies like Astrological and by Astrology.com is very powerful computer software, and it gives, and if it's written, if the reports are written well, as they are, they give very satisfactory answers to people at a fairly superficial level, but still very satisfactory, because one of the great things about astrology is that the planets move at a very specific and definite point and path and speed, and this can all be tracked on a computer really well. And so if you can produce a nice computer program that is able to use the database to combine the energies of the planets into a readable format, you can do it nicely with the computer program. For example, there is a computer program out there called Kepler, which is not an ad for Kepler because I bought Kepler and I don't like it. But there's a program there called Kepler that produces reports for nearly all of the typical astrology sites, not all, but the typical astrology sites that sell you a report for $5 or whatever it is, and using Kepler, most of them, not all of them. There's another program there called Solar Fire, which is actually produced in my hometown of Adelaide. It's a very, very, very good program. That's what most of the professional astrologers use because it's so comprehensive.
Right.
If you have a Macintosh like me, you can't run Solar Fire unless you run it in emulation or unless you have Windows installed on the machine.
Right.
And my machine's too old to install Windows, so I have a separate Windows machine. I had Solar Fire, but unfortunately it blew up, so I never got another copy. But I'm going to. Now, on the Macintosh, there's a fabulous program called Io, which is, anyone who's got a Macintosh and is interested in astrology will already know about Io. There are other programs out there for the Mac and the PC, and some of them are even quite remarkably into stuff like the revival in Hellenistic astrology has its own computer program. I forget the name of it for the moment, but it's out there in something called the ZodiacXfiles.com or something like that. Zodiac X Files. If you look it up, you find the program. And I think that as people have become more and more into computers, I think people are becoming more like computers, and they're becoming less human.
Yeah.
Whether this is an evolutionary step, shall we say, as is promulgated in so many science fiction stories, the Terminator comes to mind.
Right.
Are we going to become part machine and part human? Or are we going to become completely machine? People, you were talking to me earlier about fatalism. Now, fatalism says we are just machines. We're biological machines.
Right.
And behavioural science says the same thing. I don't agree with that, because I don't think that machines are machines that we actually. I mean, when we were talking before about the 12 casting, we were talking about the word soul, and I think that what we are is malleable. Machines aren't malleable. They do follow rules, but they're not malleable. You've got machines that aren't of stone. But if you go down to the subatomic level, and even a machine, even a rock, is basically nothing.
Right.
We are basically nothing. It's just that we have this construction that we build in our minds as a result of our sense impressions that leads us to think that we are something, or something independent.
Right.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've been talking in science recently about the fact that the only way that we can account for the way the universe seems to behave, they don't think about astrology, of course, these guys, is they've invented this idea of something called dark energy and dark matter. And the scientists have come to the conclusion that only 5% of the matter in the universe is the visible, real matter that we're used to. Only 5%. That's a tiny percentage of the mass in the universe. This is what they say.
This is what they say. Yes.
Whether it's true or not, it's another thing.
Exactly.
But back in the good old days, there used to be 5 elements. There are the 4 that we use in astrology, which are earth, fire, and water. They're not elements in the sense that a chemical element is an element. They are much deeper and more powerful, and they are more elemental. And there was a 5th element, which is known as the quintessence. In Sanskrit, it's called akasha. And this quintessence is the basis and the sort of, what's the word, the nest, if you like, that the universe and everything in it is held. So the quintessence might be dark matter and dark energy. We don't know. Am I making sense here, or am I kind of drifting off?
No, you're making sense. You're on a interesting philosophical tangent, and I was trying to kind of get a sense as to, your experience as a web pioneer. But you've taken no, that's okay. You've taken us into a very interesting dimension here, but that's cool. One of the things that I did want to kind of get a handle on for you is, as somebody that does produce content on the web, have you found over the years that your own website has grown, that you've had to employ more people? I mean, what has that been like for you to manage in terms of the load of being somebody who does charts, does consultations, but at the same time is engaged in the everyday running of a website?
It's a problem. Hello?
Yep.
When I started this, I wanted to. Previously, I had run a business with 1,000 employees and offices in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. It was too much, and there was a sort of a financial crash in 1989, which caused me to shut that down. And what I decided to do after that was I wanted to do something where I could just not employ anybody. I could do it all myself. I could program the web, I could do the astrology, I could do the advertising, I could do the finances, I could do the lot. And this was the case, although I did start off with 2 partners. This was the case with astrology on the web. I did nearly all of it. And what I found was it became impossible for one person to do it. So I started employing people. Even now I have people working for me. And then it came to the year 2007, 2008, huge crash. I had to put people off. I'm doing it all again myself. So in the last couple of months I've managed to put on another guy who's now writing our monthly horoscopes.
Right.
But doing it all yourself, it can be done. But you have to be the type of person who does not wish to expand. And as a Jupiter rule person like you, because you've got Jupiter in the first house, you're keen to expand. You're keen to get it all out there to the public.
Yeah.
And there's no stopping it. There's just no stopping it. It's a way. So you've got to surf carefully. But the thing about an astrology website, and to become popular, you have to understand not just the astrology, not just the programming, but also a way so that people can find you.
Right. Yeah.
If you're on the World Web, there's been a bit of discussion on that Facebook discussion page that I met you on about what is the way you can get more popularity for your blog. The only way you can get more popularity for your blog, obviously, is for more people to find it.
Right.
So how are they going to find it? They're going to find it by, firstly, having good content, which is written in a way that computers can find. Because the World Wide Web has got nothing to do with human beings. It's like Skynet in the Terminator. It's got a mind of its own.
Yeah.
And it's run by computers.
It's algorithmic.
These computers look for certain things.
Yeah.
And if they find them, they say, this is what we want. So Google, which is the world's biggest computer, or computers, says, this is what we want, and this is where we're going to put you. So you'll be number 1 on this list, or you'll be number 2, or you'll be number 5, or you'll be number 20. If you're number 3 million, no one's ever going to find you unless they've got your business card.
Right. Right.
It's a fact.
Yeah.
So the website has to be written in a way that the computers of Google and Yahoo and so on can find you.
Yeah.
That's a simple technique. It's called SEO, or search engine optimization. Don't bother yourself with that. Just write really good stuff and write it in a way that computers can find it. You're not just writing for people; you're also writing for computers.
Yeah. And it's getting the whole personalization of content is getting very tricky now too, because there have been tests that have been run where you could have 2 people in different parts of the country, or even different parts of, like, say, if I'm in San Francisco and somebody is in San Jose, and we're both on the internet at the same time, and we're both on Google at the same time, and we both enter in the same search term at the same time, we're going to get different results. And those results, oh yeah, absolutely, and those results are predicated on not only, well, they're predicated mostly on your history, where you go, keywords inside of your computer that Google is skimming. I mean, so what they're doing is they're literally personalizing content for you, and not always, I think, with the best intention to personalize content. It's not. I don't think they're looking out for your best interest all the time. Let's put it that way.
I agree.
So,
I'll switch that off.
So there's another
Let Google do that for me.
There's another layer now that takes place, and that gets into the whole Uranus and Aries trip, right? I mean, Aries being the individual, Uranus being technology, the internet, and drilling down and gathering information on the individual, personalizing content for the individual, which leads us back to this whole sort of, synthetic symbiosis, or the what the transhumanists, like to call the convergence. And that's really kind of, part of that story as well. These are wild times, or interesting times. We signed up for them. We're here now. And how's your longboard? You got your longboard all waxed up and ready to go here, Rob?
Well, I've been clinging to the bottom of it lately, but I think it's time to climb back on the top.
I think it's time.
I'm waiting for Jupiter to move into Taurus next week.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's Saturday, so that will bring a fairly significant change, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it will. I mean, it's not. I don't think. I know it will bring a significant change, but we haven't finished these strands of karma that we've been dealing with over the last few years. They haven't all gone away.
Right.
It's a bit like when we were talking before about the price of housing in America. It's still going down.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go down in some parts. Like Beverly Hills, I don't think it goes down.
Well, yeah.
Or Manhattan, but everywhere else it does.
See, I think that the eclipse on the 1st is going to, because of where it's situated in the U.S. chart, I think it's going to have a major impact on the housing market in the U.S. I think we're going to get some heavy news around what's going on with housing here, and I get a real wobble, because that eclipse is going to be taking place just a few degrees off of the U.S. sun, even though it's down in the southern hemisphere. Nonetheless, it's still an eclipse, and it's in Cancer, and it's going to be just a few degrees off the U.S. sun at that time. And
You're talking about the one in July.
yeah, the one in July, and I see that as being the tail end of the January 4th eclipse. So, and which was in Capricorn. I think it's going to get. I think the July 1st eclipse. I don't get a real intensity with today's eclipse, tomorrow's eclipse, because it's now almost 1 o'clock in the morning here. As much as I do with the July 1st eclipse, but I do think that the energies with this eclipse today and the eclipse on the 15th, and even going back to the eclipse on the 4th of January, I think to your point, they're all coalescing and adding to this pressure, and I think ultimately what the benefit is for us, and maybe you might be able to give some perspective, is that what we as individuals, as humans, I think are really craving for right now is transparency. Like, we want to understand, we want to know. We're tired of being lied to. I mean, you can see this in the streets of Europe. People are, they're gathering en masse in Greece and in Spain and in Italy. I mean, there's an energy rising, and what people want is they want a fair accounting. And I think for that fair accounting to take place, we're going to have to see sort of this canker sort of, rise up and burst. And I think it's unavoidable.
I think you're right, and I think that comes back to Saturn and Libra.
Yeah.
The search for justice, the need for justice, and for justice to become real in the world. Now, the social changes that have been initially set into motion by the movement of Pluto into Capricorn are going to be with us for many more years. I think it's 2025.
That's right.
Into Aquarius.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And I think people do want transparency. But on the other hand, how much transparency is a good thing? There's just no privacy anymore. There's no privacy. So,
well, that's the irony, though. I mean, there's no privacy, but there's no transparency. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, that's the irony, and I think what we want is we want an equal accounting of that ledger sheet.
Well, I think that's what we want, and that's what we're hoping for with justice, and that's the that's the Saturn in Libra at its best. But while we have this strong need for control, which is out there at the moment, illustrated by, I think, Pluto and Capricorn, control, like the government's requiring control and all that sort of stuff. And when we have, like I don't know what it's like in America, but it's pretty bad in England, where you have, in London, I think there's something like one camera filming you for every person that's in London. It's something unbelievable.
Right.
Now, while you're being filmed everywhere, and every time you enter a keystroke into your computer onto the World Wide Web, someone's tracking it.
That's right.
And, every time you get a phone call from anybody, they want your name, your address, your telephone number, whether your grandfather was a member of the Communist Party, and all this kind of stuff. What you're saying, I think, is that it's going to come to a peak, and it's going to burst, and suddenly there's going to be a nice, free, happy solution. Well, I don't know whether that's going to happen.
I'm not sure there's going to be a nice, free, happy solution, but I do think it's going to burst. Let's put it that way.
Well, what would you think would make it burst? I mean, in what way is it going to burst?
Well, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see deep economic fallout, deeper than we're experiencing now.
Deeper than we're experiencing.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt, Rob. Absolutely. And we're going to see that, and people are going to, because the flip side of this, and what we're seeing in Europe, the IMF is sort of the problem child for the IMF has been Greece, and the IMF now is floating this idea that part of Greece's austerity program will be for them to renounce their sovereignty, like they will be absorbed by the IMF. The IMF will own Greece. Well, this is nothing new. The IMF has been playing this game in third world and developing countries for the better part of the last 30 years. But this is the first time that they've done this in Europe. And this this reality is now coming to the first world, so to speak. And this is where I think people are they're going to get hit upside the head with the wake up stick. And they're going to.
Well, it's not before time.
What's that?
It's not before time.
Right. No, I agree, and I think that we're going to. That people are going to say, okay, well, what happened here? You know, I didn't make these decisions. The politicians made these decisions. Now I'm having to suffer for the bad deals and the toxic debt that they absorbed, and I think it's in Europe. In the United States, we've just gotten so anesthetized and complacent and distracted and scared. People in the United States, are, to a large extent, are scared of standing out and being problematic and being considered radical or conspiracy theorists. I mean, there's such a stigma now in this country, to some extent, on a mass media level, for people to do that people are frightened and they'll be ostracized for doing that. I don't think that that's the case in Europe. I think that Europe it's a much older society. They've seen a lot of varieties of political factions and the rise and fall of various houses. So they're fairly sophisticated, maybe a little more jaded than us, but sophisticated. But at the same time, they have a much deeper history of protest when they have to. And we're going to see that. I mean, my sense here, Rob, is we're going to see that this summer is going to be the summer of I wouldn't necessarily call it global protest or global riots, but I think it's going to be very hot in Europe this summer. And this is where I think we're going to see some of the convulsions and some of the, for lack of a better term, pus coming out of the public wound here, and I don't get that there's necessarily going to be an easy fix or a happy ending, because we're really at the beginning stages of this. We're at the pre-stage, but it's starting to happen and it's starting to foment. And I don't know how it's going to manifest and unfold and resolve itself, but I think we're at a point now where there's almost no turning back.
When you're talking about Europe, you mean Western Europe?
Yeah, Western Europe.
Eastern Europe has had its massive.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about Western Europe. I'm really, pardon me if I'm excluding Eastern Europe, but I don't mean to exclude them. I'm talking Western Europe, and I'm talking mostly France, Italy, Spain, Greece, England, Ireland, even though it's not really technically part of Europe. But I'm thinking these are the countries, even Germany to some extent, although Germany has a very good economy, and they will not suffer economically like other parts of Europe. But I'm really thinking about Spain, Italy, Greece, France to a certain extent, maybe even the south of France because of the variety of the ethnic makeup there. But I think this is going to be a very hot summer in Europe.
I think you're right, and I think that places like that are in trouble, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, they have to make a decision themselves as to whether they're going to stay in the Eurozone. But I mean, we're getting into politics and away from astrology here, really. I think from the point of view of America, if it's going to come to... America's like Europe. It's the same size. It's approximately the same population. The difference being that you're shall we say, you have a common language, although I believe that 50% of the people there now speak Spanish.
It's clear, yeah.
You've got... America is divided into 7 economic zones. Now, are these economic zones going to stay together in the United States, or are they going to split up? Or are you going to form an economic union with Canada and Mexico? Now, a few years back, we were writing on our site about the way that people seem to be, like the authorities, seem to be deliberately devaluing the US dollar.
Right.
Now, why are they doing that? It's because you can make money out of doing it, not
Sure.
for any other reason. And they're doing it so that it gets closer to the Canadian dollar and closer to the peso.
That's right.
So that you can bring in a combined currency, which I believe the name's been floated as the Amaro or the Amero or whatever they call it,
Right.
as opposed to the dinero.
Right.
And this may come about in the same way as they did that in Europe, where they had a single currency, and then you find that the people in charge of the banking organisations have a lot more power because they're able to control different parts of the conglomerate in a way that is that they wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't for the fact that it was conglomerate. And this is very Pluto in Capricorn.
That's
I
right.
think.
Yeah.
Now we've got another 20 years of that. So whether or not America is going to split into 5 or 6 different places, or whether it's going to combine with Canada and Mexico, remains to be seen. I don't know. I haven't done enough analysis of it. But Europe could break up again, or it could simply get stronger. There's still plenty of people, plenty of countries such as Turkey that want to join
Yeah.
the economic union, the European Union.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read the book 1984 by George Orwell.
Sure.
Most of us have. And what you have there is a drifting kind of conglomerate, 3 big conglomerates of countries in the world that are at war with each other constantly,
Right.
in order to keep the people from knowing what's really going on.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is going on in America now, and in other parts here as well, where, suddenly we have this big patriotic surge, we have to go out there. You've just had Memorial Day, so you've no doubt had as much of it as you can take, where they're out, praising the war machine and saying what great heroes they are, the people that have been sent out there to have their arms and legs blown off.
Right.
And, I think that it will be... It's up to the young people to do something about this. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm in my 60s. So my days of revolution in the streets and so on date back quite a long way. And I'm a bit beyond it now. But I think that people like at my son's age, who's 15 now, so he's going to have to deal with all this. And so are his compadres. And whether they are going to deal with it in the kind of way that the apathetic way that's been dealt with in recent years remains to be seen, because their generation has Pluto and Sagittarius.
Right.
What are they going to do? Think back to the previous revolutionary generation, Pluto and Leo, the baby boomers as they call them now.
Right.
That's a fire sign. We've got it's out of that fire sign now, but it will be in that generation is going to be out there trying to find typically Sagittarian solutions, such as spiritual solutions of travel and intermixture adventure,
Yeah.
and moving out rather than in.
Yeah.
So,
No, they're going to be interesting. I think that they're a wild card. I think the Pluto and Sag. My son is Pluto and Sag, but
Yeah, mine too.
my son is younger than your son by 8 years. My son is 7. In fact, his Pluto is conjunct my Jupiter.
lucky you.
And anyway, but I think they can be a real wild card. And the reason I say this is because Sagittarius can be so zealous at times. And I think that they can either be great revolutionaries and complete and utter, bullshit detector warriors, right?
Yeah.
Or I think they could flip into, or a faction of them could flip into, and maybe for a while they may flip back into hardcore fascism. I mean, that's another, kind of zealous side of Sagittarius in terms of idealism and the extremism of idealism with Pluto. So at the end of the day, I'll put my money on the side of truth tellers, but I would not be surprised if that's a generation that might even go through, one significant sea change where they're indoctrinated and brainwashed, and then they come out of it. And then they're on the other side of that. And then that's when they're very powerful, very empowered, and maybe this cycle can really end. And that's that's kind of my sense. Although I just like for them to come out and just say no, when it counts.
Well, I hope that you're right. In days gone by, not so much now in astrology, but in days gone by, the sign of Sagittarius was considered a very violent sign. The centaurs, as you may recall, were very violent, mindless beasts, with the exception of Chiron. And so Sagittarius is considered to be a warlike sign, a very warlike sign. Now, whether they're going to have a big war or not, they're already having them. There's wars everywhere. But I hope, too, that, see, the higher level of Sagittarius is the mind, not the lower mind of Gemini, the higher mind, the spiritual side of the mind, the religious side. Now, are they going to fall into religious bigotry, or are they going to climb into religious tolerance? Now, we see in America this generation that we're talking about here, they're being completely brainwashed by the media. I've never noticed in my 60 years of life fashion to have such an effect, and so quickly. It's kind of amplified by the electronic mind that we're surrounded with, the mind of the Twitter and the internet and the mobile phone. These things have a powerful effect, and it's almost instantaneous. There's always been fashion. The thing about astrology is it's about fashion, but there's always been fashion. But now the fashion seems to affect it. You can just see it sweeping over them in waves. It's just not like it used to be. And that may be something to do with acceleration. It might be something to do with the planetary configuration of the moment. I'd say it probably has. But I'm hoping, as you are, that the spiritual side of Sagittarius comes forward. But in general, we're on this planet as a way of finding what it is that we need. And quite often suffering is what brings that to our attention. Now, they haven't really had much suffering yet these days. So we'll see what happens to them.
It's funny that you mention that. The Pluto and Scorpio kids have had some intense suffering. They were, I don't know if you caught any of this, but, once Osama bin Laden, quote unquote, was captured and dispatched and unceremoniously dumped in the sea.
Yes, very convenient.
Very convenient. There were a number of kids who were like my son's age, or maybe a little bit older, 8, 9, 10 years old, when 9/11 happened. And a lot of times we don't understand how these events traumatize, generations and subgenerations. And for them, having Saddam Hussein being captured, and I'm not kidding you, these kids said, I can go to sleep at night now. And to me, it's really tragic, because astrology aside, I mean, I think that most of the war on terror and everything that's evolved out of 9/11 is a fiction. It's a very dark fairy tale, and they've been nursing fears and paranoia based on, for lack of a better term, a twisted illusion. But now they've been granted some kind of relief, and this is ironic because this was their event. This is what's traumatized them. And yes, to a large extent, the Pluto and Sagittarius kids were too young to understand that or catch that. So they don't have that same kind of imprinting, at least the older ones, that the Pluto and Scorpio kids do.
No, they don't. But I'm not sure about your son. But when the Americans announced that they'd captured Osama bin Laden, he was very sceptical.
Yeah. Good. That's a Pluto. That's a Pluto and Sag. You taught him well, man. That's a Pluto and Sag trait.
That's right.
My son is more interested in catching Pokemon than Osama bin Laden right now.
Well, he's not old enough.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what are we going to do about this? I mean, the last fire sign the last Pluto in a fire sign was Pluto in Leo.
Right.
And I was growing up, when I was his age, we were all sure that the world was going to end within our generation because of the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't happen. We've been liberated from that. Although, of course, people still have nuclear bombs. But there's no big worry about that anymore. Now, there's no big worry about Osama bin Laden, or there's no big worry about this or that. Everybody's got something to worry about. They'll all find something, and they'll either come through it and turn to materialism, or they return to a spiritual growth.
Right.
Now, this world is about whether or not you are going to rise to a new level or whether you don't. Because if you don't, you'll just come back again and again and again and again. Now, whether we like that or not, I don't know. Some people do. Some people like the idea of coming back again and again. Now, I don't know how much of your audience is Christian, but Christians, of course, don't believe in reincarnation.
Right.
It was taken out of their religion in the was it the 5th century? I think it was the 5th century. They took it out of the religion. Prior to that, they were happy about it.
Right.
Religion and so on. And indeed, St. Paul and other big writers in the Bible clearly implied there was the idea of reincarnation. But anyway, the thing is this: if you're going to go to a material, everyday, closed off environment where you've got your aerials pulled in, you aren't going to see what happens to you. Things just come along and smack you in the face without looking at it. If you become aware, if you study astrology, if you become interested in improving your state of growth, in becoming aware, in contacting the divine spirit within you, you will move forward. Now, if the wave diverts into one that crashes into the sand and the other that kind of turns into foam, I don't really know, but we'll have to see what happens. Sagittarius is potentially able to contact the divine, more so than any other sign. So we just have to see whether it's the case indeed that in the end of 2012 the mothership will come down and take us all away. No one seems to have jumped off their roofs for the rapture in the last.
No, I mean, a couple of people got blown off the face of the earth in Joplin, but I would say
I don't think that was the rapture.
I don't think that was the rapture. Now we're all still here, and it'll be interesting because I do think that this next, gateway that Harold Camping has pointed out and hung his next sign on, which is that October 21st period. I actually think that that's a pretty interesting period. Carl Johann Kalaman, who I interviewed about a year and a half ago, he basically sees that is the end of the Mayan calendar. He's got his own calculations, but interestingly enough, it's also when this comet Elenin is going to be very, very close to Earth. I mean, it comes in around September 11th, actually, September 10th, and it gets closest in October. So we're going to have two interesting events in terms of synchronicity and time. Kalaman's version of the end of the Mayan calendar, which quite honestly does make some sense. I know a little bit about it, and it's the last wave spell, and it ends on 13, I believe, Ahau on, I think is it October 27th, and then you've got Elenin. So who knows? Maybe Camping might get this thing right eventually, but October.
I don't think so.
I don't think he will either. But this October period, though, I do think it's an interesting time in terms of different pieces of information coalescing, and
It's interesting.
Yeah.
But don't forget that the Mayan calendar. It's all very well to say that the Mayan calendar ends, next year sometime, or this year sometime.
Right.
Had to end sometime.
Right.
They can't go on writing them forever, can they? I mean, how long ago did they write this calendar? It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. Now, they've done a good job, and Carl Johann Kalaman has done a good job of presenting all this stuff to the world, along with the people that he disagrees with, whose name I now forget. But, I mean, these things seem to me to be sideshows.
Yeah.
The key thing is you've got to be here in your life, not living for when the end of the world is going to come, or
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
Something else is going to happen.
Yeah.
You have to. I don't wish to use this word lightly, but you have to be here now.
Yeah.
And if you aren't, then you're somewhere else. And when you're somewhere else, life is not happening to you. What's happening to you is misery, sorrow, hope, expectation, working until the day you drop, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And people need to concentrate on what it is that they need, not on what they want. That's one of the problems that we've got. And particularly, I think, the case in the Western world, especially in America, but also in Australia and other parts of a similar culture. We're all out to get what we want. We're not out to get what we need. We don't know the difference. And finding out what the difference is between want and need is sometimes brought very painfully to you by astrological aspects such as we've been discussing.
Yeah.
You know, big events that happen to you in your 12th house, or whatever, or you get a combination of Saturn and Jupiter together in your 6th house, and you get desperately ill and nearly die, which is what happened to me when Saturn and Jupiter was combined in my 6th house in the year 1999-2000. So these kind of things wake you up. And if they don't wake you up, you might as well be dead.
Right. Well, I think that is a great full stop to
It's up to a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Well, I got a good feeling from you when you jumped into the fray on that little debate we had going there on Facebook, and my intuition was on the money. You've been a great guest, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much, and I wish you and your listeners a very wonderful time ahead.
And have a great eclipse. I think you're gonna get that longboard out today.
I need to.
All right. Take good care, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.